Welcome back to the Acceptance Project podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Gross. Now today I want to talk about something we've sort of touched on before, but we've never really dug too deep into this topic. And that's self-compassion. This week I'm reading a book by one of my favorite authors and researchers, Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. And a quote by her, "Talk to yourself like someone you love," seemed more than perfect for this week's podcast. And that got me started thinking how I work to show others compassion, understanding, and respect, but all too often, I don't show those same attributes to myself. Sometimes we are so hard on ourselves that we're doomed to fail, and that strengthens our self talk about our many failures. So, grab your cup of coffee and maybe something to take notes on. I'm going to challenge you today to step outside of that box and grow alongside the rest of us. I got up early Sunday morning, just after the sun had peeked through the windows, and decided to start my day. I came downstairs to the kitchen to make my morning routine of coffee. I flipped on the TV as I stood there watching the Keurig, almost as if it might suddenly decide to quit working and go back to bed for a few more hours. Before the first cup of coffee, I'm not sure I'm capable of making any major life decisions anyway. In fact, if you ask me an important question before the first sip, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to tell you to come back in about 5 minutes. Some people say they don't function without coffee. I like to think I function, just not at a level anyone should depend on. So as I stood there waiting, an old song came on the television. Many of you will probably remember it. It was Lionel Richie's Easy. Now most people will know it for the one line, "Easy like Sunday morning." I've heard that song hundreds of times over the years, but for some reason it landed a little differently that morning. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the smell of fresh coffee filling the house. Or maybe it was simply because for the first time in a while, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I was just standing there listening. I've noticed something as I've gotten older. Mornings have become one of my favorite parts of the day. That would have surprised the younger version of me. Growing up, I wanted to sleep as late as I could, then spend the rest of the day riding my bike, exploring the woods, or jumping into the creek to cool off during those hot summer afternoons. The day was about adventure, definitely not reflection. And somewhere along the way, mornings changed. They've become a gift. Before the emails start arriving, before the phone starts ringing, and before the responsibilities of the day begin demanding my attention, there's a small window of time where everything feels still. It's during those quiet moments that I find myself thinking about life, think about where I've been, where I'm headed, the people I care about, the work I still hope to do, and sometimes the things I've been carrying around longer than I should have. Now, that morning, as I stood there with that cup of coffee in my hand, listening to Lionel Richie sing about an easy Sunday morning, one thought quietly found its way into my mind. It wasn't dramatic, and it definitely wasn't profound. It was simply this: this week, I want to be kinder to myself. Now, that may not sound like much, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how difficult that promise can be to keep. Now, I'm pretty good at encouraging other people. I usually find the right words when someone else is struggling, and I can remind them that mistakes don't define them, that tomorrow is another day, and that they deserve a little grace. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to offer those same words to the person I see in the mirror every morning. And I have a feeling I'm not the only one. Now, why is it that we can be so incredibly compassionate toward other people, but when it comes to ourselves, all that compassion seems to disappear? Think about it for just a minute. Imagine your best friend calls you and says they've made a mistake at work. They're embarrassed. They feel like they've let everyone down, and they start telling you they're a failure and they probably never get it right. What would you say? Chances are you wouldn't tell them that they were a failure. You wouldn't remind them of every mistake they've ever made or tell them they should be ashamed of themselves. Instead, you'd probably say something like, "Well, it's okay. You're human. Everybody makes mistakes. Learn from it and move on." Now, here's the question that really matters. When was the last time you gave yourself that very same speech? For a lot of us, the answer is probably never. Instead, we become our own prosecutor. We gather every piece of evidence against ourselves, present it before an imaginary jury, and somehow, well, we always manage to find ourselves guilty. It's amazing how our minds work. Someone else forgets your birthday and you think, well, they're probably just busy. You forget someone's birthday and you've convinced yourself you're the worst friend in the world. Your coworker misses a deadline and you tell yourself they're under a lot of pressure. You miss a deadline and you've already updated your resume because obviously your career is over. Sounds ridiculous when you say it like that, doesn't it? Yeah, that's exactly how many of us think every single day. I've discovered something over the years. The person who's been hardest on Bryan Gross has usually been Bryan Gross. It hasn't been a coworker, a student, or even a family member. It's been me. I don't know exactly where we learned to do that. Maybe it's because we spend so much time comparing ourselves to everyone else. Or maybe somewhere along the way we started believing that if we were hard enough on ourselves, we'd finally become successful. Or maybe we just convinced ourselves that criticism was the same thing as motivation. The problem is, I've never met anyone who was criticized into becoming happier. I've never met anyone who was shamed into becoming healthier, or who woke up one morning and said, you know what completely changed my life? Constantly reminding myself that I wasn't good enough. It just doesn't work that way. So imagine teaching a child to ride a bicycle. They wobble down the driveway, lose their balance, scrape a knee, and look back at you with tears in their eyes. Can you imagine saying, well, that's because you're terrible at riding bikes. You should probably just quit. Of course not. You would never say that. You'd help them back up, dust them off, maybe laugh together a little, and remind them that everyone falls when they are learning something new. Then you'd encourage them to climb back on the bike and try again. So why don't we treat ourselves that way? Somewhere along the way, we accept this strange idea that compassion has to be earned. We tell ourselves we'll finally deserve kindness after we lose the weight, get the promotion, finish the degree, write the book, pay off the bills, or accomplish whatever goal we've put out in front of ourselves. The problem is that finish line keeps moving. There's always one more accomplishment, one more expectation, one more reason to postpone giving ourselves a little grace. For most of us, there's always something that needs to be fixed. If the fence isn't broken, the truck probably is. If the truck is finally running, the grass needs mowing. If everything else is finished, somebody can walk around the yard for 5 minutes and find something else that needs attention. I think a lot of us treat ourselves the same way. We spend so much time trying to fix every flaw we think we have that we forget we're not actually broken. Now, sure, we all have things we can improve, but we all make mistakes. We all have bad days. But needing to grow doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Now, I want to be clear about something because self compassion is often misunderstood. Being kind to yourself doesn't mean making excuses, doesn't mean pretending your mistakes didn't happen or refusing to take responsibility. If I make a mistake, I should own it. If I hurt someone, I should apologize. If I need to grow, well, then I should keep growing. Self compassion simply means I don't have to insult myself while I'm doing it. Growth and grace can exist together. In fact, I think they kind of need each other. I've come to believe that the people who accomplish the most in life aren't the people who never fail. They're the people who refuse to let failure become their identity. Failure is something we experience. It was never meant to become who we are. Maybe that's why that Sunday morning felt so peaceful. For just a little while, standing there with a cup of coffee in my hand and an old Lionel Richie song playing in the background, I wasn't thinking about everything I hadn't finished. I wasn't criticizing myself for yesterday, and I certainly wasn't worrying about next month. I was simply enjoying the moment. Maybe that's where self compassion begins, not with some grand declaration or dramatic life change, but with one quiet decision to stop fighting ourselves long enough to remember that we're worthy of the same kindness we freely give everyone else. Before we wrap up today's conversation, I'd like to share three promises I've decided to make to myself. Now, they're not New Year's resolutions, and they're certainly not promises I'll keep perfectly every day. They're simply reminders of the kind of person I want to become. If any of these resonate with you, maybe they'll become promises you make to yourself as well. The first promise that I'm making to myself is I'll notice the way I speak to myself. Now, most of us don't even realize the conversations we're having inside of our own heads. They happen so quickly that we hardly notice them. We make one mistake and immediately tell ourselves we're an idiot. We forget something important and convince ourselves we're getting old. We compare ourselves to someone else and decide, well, we aren't successful enough, attractive enough, smart enough, or even accomplished enough. After a while, those thoughts become so familiar that we mistake them for the truth. But this week, I'm going to pay attention to that inner voice, not because I expect it to disappear overnight, but because I know I can't change something I refuse to notice. When that critical voice starts talking, I want to pause and ask myself one simple question. Is this true? Or is this just fear pretending to be truth? Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is interrupt the story we've been telling ourselves for years. Now, the second promise I'm going to tell myself is I'll allow myself to be imperfect. I've almost mastered that one. That sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Yet so many of us live as though we're expected to get everything right the first time. We want to say the perfect thing, make the perfect decision, have the perfect career, the perfect family, body, and somehow keep everyone happy along the way. It's exhausting. Here's something I've learned after teaching psychology for many years. Growth has never required perfection. In fact, growth almost always begins with failure. Every new skill you've ever learned involved mistakes. Every meaningful relationship has required misunderstandings, apologies, and well, even second chances. Every successful person you admire has stumbled more times than you'll probably ever know. Perfection isn't the goal, progress is. So when I make a mistake this week, I'm going to try something different. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? I'm going to ask, what can I learn from this? It's a much healthier question, and it leaves room for growth instead of shame. Now, the third promise, and this one may be the most difficult. I'll celebrate progress instead of perfection. Now, I think this may be the hardest promise of all because we're so conditioned to focus on what still needs to be done. We lose 10 pounds and immediately think about the 20 pounds we still want to lose. Let's celebrate every pound. Every pound lost is a victory. We finish one project and start worrying about the next one. We accomplish a goal we've been working toward for months, and before we've even celebrated, we've already moved the finish line farther down the road. What if we stopped doing that? What if we paused long enough to appreciate how far we've already come? Take a moment and think about the person you were 5 years ago. Think about the lessons you've learned, the challenges you've survived, the relationships you've built, and the strength you've developed through experiences you never would have chosen. You may not be where you ultimately want to be, but I have a feeling you're not where you used to be either. This week, I'm going to celebrate the small victories. I'll celebrate showing up even when I don't feel like it. I'll celebrate learning something new instead of expecting myself to already know everything. I'll celebrate taking one more step forward instead of criticizing myself because I haven't reached the finish line yet. Well, and maybe that's what self compassion really looks like. Not lowering our standards, not settling for mediocrity, but recognizing that becoming the person we're meant to be is a journey, and every journey deserves a little grace along the way. As I was thinking about this week's episode, something else occurred to me. Self compassion isn't just about individuals, it's about the environments we create for one another. Think about it for a minute. Imagine what would happen if children grew up in schools where making a mistake wasn't something to be embarrassed about, but something to learn from. Imagine workplaces where employees felt supported instead of judged, where asking for help wasn't seen as weakness but as wisdom. Imagine organizations where leaders understood that people perform their best when they feel valued and respected and psychologically safe. When we build people up instead of tearing them down, everyone benefits. Students become more engaged in the classroom, employees become more productive, teams communicate better, relationships become healthier, behavioral problems decrease because people feel seen instead of invisible. Attendance improves because people actually want to be where they are. Communities become stronger because people begin believing that they matter. That's really why I created Bridging Success. For years, I've had the privilege of speaking and working with students and educators, counselors, business leaders, healthcare professionals, and community organizations across the country. No matter where I go, I continue hearing the same message. People are exhausted. They're carrying invisible burdens, doubting themselves, and wondering if they're enough. The setting changes, but the human experience is still the same. My passion is helping organizations create cultures where people don't simply survive, but they thrive. Whether we're talking about self compassion, belonging, bullying prevention, psychological safety, resilience, or creating healthier workplace cultures. The goal is always the same: helping people recognize their value and empowering them to see that same value in others. Now, if you're a school administrator, a business leader, conference organizer, nonprofit, or maybe even just a community organization looking for a speaker who can bring these conversations to life, I'd love the opportunity to work with you. Together, we can create environments where people feel encouraged to grow, supported through challenges, and reminded that success isn't just measured by performance, but by the way we care for ourselves and one another. If you'd like to start that conversation, you can reach out to me directly at brian@bridgingsuccess.com. I'd love to learn more about your organization and maybe even explore how we can work together to build stronger individuals, stronger teams, and stronger communities. Because when we invest in people, everyone benefits. As we come to the end of today's episode, I hope you'll think back to that quiet Sunday morning with me. Picture yourself standing in your own kitchen, waiting for that first cup of coffee, watching the sun fill the room, and give yourself permission to just simply be present for a few moments. The truth is, life is going to keep moving. Monday morning is going to arrive, and emails will pile up, and deadlines will still exist. There will always be another responsibility waiting for us, another goal to accomplish, another problem to solve. We can't control most of those things, but what we can control is the voice that goes with us through every one of those moments. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's conversation, it's this: you deserve the same compassion you so freely give everyone else. You don't have to earn kindness. You don't have to become perfect before you're allowed to appreciate who you already are. You don't even have to wait until you've reached every goal before believing your life has value. You are a work in progress, just like every other person you've ever admired. The difference is that you've had a front row seat to every one of your mistakes, while you've only seen the highlight reel of everyone else's life. That's an unfair comparison, and it's one we make far too often. So this week, when that inner critic starts whispering that you're not good enough, not smart enough, successful enough, or not even worthy enough, I hope you'll pause for just a moment, take a breath, remember the promises we've talked about today, and ask yourself a simple question: would I say these words to someone I love? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to choose different words. Changing the way we speak to ourselves won't happen overnight. Years of self criticism won't disappear after listening to one podcast, but change begins with one decision. And maybe today's decision is simply this: I'm going to stop being my own worst enemy and start becoming my own greatest encourager. Now, before I let you go, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you enjoy the Acceptance Project podcast, could you take just a minute to maybe leave a rating or write a review wherever you listen? Whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or another platform, every review helps move people closer to these conversations. If today's episode encouraged you, challenged you, or maybe reminded you of someone who could use a little extra compassion, I'd also encourage you to share it with them. You never know when one conversation might make a meaningful difference in someone else's day. And just remember, the person you spend the most time with is yourself. Choose to become someone who speaks with hope instead of shame, with grace instead of guilt, and with encouragement instead of criticism. The journey toward becoming your best self doesn't begin by tearing yourself down. It begins by believing you're worthy of getting back up every single time life knocks you down. So, until next time, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. The Acceptance Project podcast is a production of Bridging Success, LLC. To learn more about the podcast and our work, please visit bridgingsuccess.com. This podcast and its contents are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. I'm Dr. Bryan Gross, but I'm not a licensed therapist. The topics and opinions shared by me and any guests are our own and should not replace professional or medical advice. If you're seeking mental health support, medical guidance, or help with personal matters, please reach out to a licensed professional who can provide the individual support you need.